Okay. I can't remember where we were, but I think it was right here. I think the last thing I talked about was voting. Who the hell knows? I can remember. This text, this is really fascinating to me because I've never actually taught this class before. I'm not exactly sure where the textbook is going. So I apologize from the very beginning because when I put all these lectures together, I wasn't exactly sure where the textbook was going to end up. This is about the law. This would be a very good pre-law class, actually. And we're going to talk, I'm going to give you Latin phrases and Italian phrases that they use. Textbook is really fascinating. This is Reitman's Psychology and the Legal System. But it's really kind of fascinating. This is an older book. As you can see, they used to have 4 authors, and now they only have these 2. Green and Heilbrunn are the authors. If you don't have a textbook yet, I don't know. You'll probably need one because I'm not exact. I have one, of course. I think I do. Ooh, we're going to run out of seats, aren't we? Okay. I know where to steal some. That's okay. I mean borrow. Did I say steal? I meant borrow. Okay. The text concentrates on the behavior of participants in the legal system. This book will also devote attention to the determinants of how conceptions of justice and the moral dilemmas we all face all the time. Moral dilemmas and specifically dilemmas of the justice system. Hopefully you've never come in contact with the justice system. Yes, I was jacked up once. Okay, and this is the story. I was riding in a car with my friends. And because all my friends were black, not in the car, I had lots of friends, okay? I don't only have black friends, but I was riding in a car. I was the only white guy in the car. And there were 6 of us. This is back in the old days when cars were the size of boats. They were huge. Anyway, so there were 6 of us in the car, and of course the driver was African American, and the police stopped us. And the excuse they used was that one of their taillights was out, which was incorrect. One of our taillights was not out. But they got us all out of the car. This is during the Civil Rights Movement. We were actually headed to Indianapolis to a rally, to a civil rights rally. I was with my friends. We got stopped before we got out of town. Anyway, so they wanted to make sure that we weren't, I have no idea, terrorists? We didn't even have terrorists in the United States at that time. Anyway, they wanted to make sure that they were trying to harass the African Americans in the car. I was in the middle in the back, and I'm not a very big person, as you notice from my person. But so as we got out of the car, wait a second. I need to get you a chair. I will go get one. I know where they are. I stole one last time. I borrowed one. Okay, so as we got out of the car, I was in the middle. Of course I was in the middle. In old cars, they had the transmission was in the middle of the car. So being the shortest person in the car, I always had to sit in the middle and put my feet on the console. You know, it's a hump about this big in the middle of the car. So I was in the middle. They couldn't see me. They're jacking up the rest of the guys, and I get out of the car. And all of a sudden, the guy's eyes got this big. The cop, there were 2 of them actually. Their eyes got this big because here's this white guy in amongst the black guys. Now he didn't mind jacking up the black guys. He did it all the time. He was, you know, it's that racial harassment. But he was a little antsy about jacking up a white guy. Mainly because he was afraid I might sue them, and it's something that the African American community doesn't do. They try to stay away from the criminal justice system as much as possible. But here I am, a white guy, and he has no clue who I am. The reality is that I was going to a relatively elite school. He knew who we were. He knew that these black guys were from Wabash. He knew that I was from Wabash. And of course, he didn't know how much money my family had or whether he was going to insult me or embarrass me. But they had to continue, so they jacked me up just like they jacked up everybody else. He didn't realize I was in the car. He stopped them because they were black. He was trying to, he knew that there was a rally in Indianapolis, and of course they were trying to slow things down as much as they possibly could. Anyway, that's my story. We weren't arrested. There was no reason to arrest us. There was actually no reason to pat us down, but of course that's what happened. They got us all against the car, you know, and they patted us down to make sure we didn't have guns or clubs or zip guns or whatever. This is back in the 60s, back in the late 60s. Anyway, they let us go, and we went on to Indianapolis to the Civil Rights Rally. And of course, things have changed because of that rally, I'm sure, because of the Civil Rights Rally. And then, of course, they had that deal in Charlottesville over a couple weeks ago, and now things are going backwards. Kind of interesting. Main focus will be the role of psychology in the criminal and civil justice systems. Sometimes it seems like I'm teaching law or criminal justice far more than I'm teaching anything else. But the reality is we're supposed to be reading psychology in this. So it's going to sound like I am a lawyer and I'm talking about all the interesting things that people do. Forensic psychologists are really kind of interesting. There are forensic scientists. There are also forensic psychologists. Not all forensic psychologists, of course, are profilers. There are forensic psychologists that will deal with criminals to try to determine if they are competent enough to stand trial. Forensic psychologists generate and communicate information to answer specific legal questions or to help resolve legal disputes. Has anybody ever heard of Dr. Phil McGraw? Okay. He's a forensic psychologist. As strange as that may seem, and that was his job before he was, and he's a millionaire. He made millions and millions of dollars being a jury consultant in his previous life as whatever. And he was consulting on a jury for Oprah, and that's how he came in contact with Oprah, and because of that, she invited him on her show. He's a little bit, if you've ever dealt with psychologists before, he's a little bit gruffer. He's a little bit more direct than most psychologists are. He has a show of his own, Dr. Phil. I think that, yeah, he does have a show. Anyway, when people come onto his show, he fixes them in, 30 minutes? He's pretty damn good. I mean, if he can fix somebody in 30 minutes, usually it takes weeks or months or years of counseling, but here he is, he can fix people in 30 minutes. And it's because he's so direct. His style of psychology is called rational emotive therapy. It was developed by Ellis. So there is a technique like that, where they fix people really quick. Well, not that quick, not in 30 minutes, but they can deal with people in a matter of weeks rather than months. Anyway, that's Dr. Phil. So Dr. Phil is an actual psychologist. He's not a counseling psychologist anymore. He doesn't have a license. But of course, he's a television personality, which is kind of interesting. Most forensic psychologists are trained as clinical psychologists whose specialty involves the psychological evaluation and treatment of others. And if you want to see a forensic psychologist, Bull, the television show Bull, it's on Tuesday nights after NCIS and before NCIS New Orleans. It's in between those two shows. If you want to see a forensic psychologist and how they function, Bull is actually, that's a television show written by Phil McGraw, by Dr. McGraw. Anyway, that's a forensic psychologist. Most forensic psychologists are trained as clinical psychologists whose specialty involves the psychological evaluation and treatment of others. These psychologists are often asked to evaluate an individual and prepare a report for court or provide testimony. Usually they are what they refer to as a friend of the court. That means the judge has asked them to evaluate a select individual. They're not on the side of the prosecution, they're not on the side of the defense, they are what is referred to as a friend of the court. The problem with being a friend of the court is the fee isn't very good. If you are if you work for the prosecution or you work for the defense, you'll make a lot more money. They'll have to pay you for it. The court only pays you a select fee. They are seeking to identify mental illnesses, of course, that might affect their ability to go to trial. There was an individual in this state that shot Jeff Jeffers. Wasn't that her name? The congressman that was shot in the head? And he killed a couple people down in Tucson, I think, wasn't it? Okay. Anyway, and I can't think of that guy's name. Anyway, does anybody remember what the guy's name was? He did not go to trial. The reason he didn't go to trial is because they judged that he was incompetent to stand trial. He had a mental illness, and that's why he loaded up his 9mm and started blasting away. And Congressman Jeffers and all the other people in the crowd killed a little girl that was 10 years old, I think. Anyway, sad, sad, sad. One of Madonna's neighbors on her in her posh apartment complex in New York City claimed that she played music so loud that they were forced to leave their apartment several times a day. I don't know if you've ever lived this close to anybody, but if they play music really, really, really loud, a lot of times it shakes your walls. It's kind of like driving down the road and coming upon a car, or a car comes up behind you and they have their bass turned up really high and they've got this amazing sound system in their car. And it literally shakes your windshield when they stop beside you. You can hear their music. Well, you can hear their bass. You can't hear the harmony. You can only hear the bass. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, or if you have a vehicle that's like that, like Bryant does. Is your car that way?
Sometimes.
You have your great sound system. Okay.
When Katy Perry goes on.
I lived in Germany once upon a time, and we were living in a farmer's house. And upstairs, my family were up there. My kids were just little bitty guys. I just gotten married to my third wife. So here we were in Germany. I was a staff sergeant. She was and then I became a tech sergeant. She was a lieutenant or a captain or whatever she was. Anyway, so we're upstairs, and downstairs is a civilian working on the base, American guy, and he would his wife left him. So he was so depressed that he decided that he was going to listen to music all night long and turn the volume way, way up. And it was this big, hairy guy. Back then, of course, people didn't have as much facial hair. This guy had a full beard, big guy. He must have weighed 250, 300 pounds. He was huge. He's like 6'5". He's not in the military, so he didn't care about rank. Of course, at the time I weighed maybe 150 pounds, and so this guy was double my body weight. He was also almost twice as tall as I was. So here he is, he's playing his music. And for some reason in this house, if you played music downstairs, it funneled through the stairwell, and it actually amplified. So we could hear it better than he could. And besides that, he was drunk. And you know, drunk people, their ears, something's wrong with their ears. They can, huh, what'd you say? You know, you get that a lot when you're talking to drunk people. Anyway, so this guy would play the same song all night long. Who are you? I hate this. I heard it for a whole year. Anyway, my wife would go down and ask me to turn it down. Sometimes he would. You know, he loved my kids. He'd say, "You're keeping the kids awake," and he'd turn it down. And then the next night, of course, he'd get drunk. I can't remember what the hell was going on the night before. If I went down to ask him to turn it down, he would get violent. He'd get belligerent. Yeah, he wouldn't hit my wife. He wouldn't hit he wanted to hit me. Of course, he was big, so I could move a lot faster than he could. So he would chase me out into the town, and then he'd go back and turn down his stereo. Anyway, we listened to that song over and over and over again. A lot of vibration and whatnot. So the same thing was happening in this very posh area. This is in Germany, in Mauschwatz, Germany. But this is happening in New York. So who was right? Does Madonna get to play her music as loud as she wants, or is the other individual the one that won the case? whose rights would prevail? Is it the individual rights of Madonna, or is it the common good? I mean, she was shaking the walls of this huge apartment. She lived in an apartment. She lived with other individuals. So whose rights would prevail? Madonna's or everybody else in the building? The common good. And this is a question that jurisprudence has to deal with all the time. We're talking about individual rights, and we're also talking about the common good. And of course, lately, for some reason, the police seem to be targeting young black males, and they're killing them in the streets. And they claim, of course, that young black males commit more crimes than anybody else. So that's the reason they're blowing them away, whether they're armed or not. So is it the common good, or is it individual rights? If I was of course I can't do this on the reservation, but if I were in Iowa, I can walk around with a sidearm. That's my right, my Second Amendment rights. I don't own a gun, so I wouldn't do that. But I would have the right to do that. But do I have the right to walk past a school with my sidearm? We're talking about common good, and we're talking about individual rights. Which one is more important, common good or individual rights? This is a tough one. This is one that the courts have to decide. So what do you think? Who should have won? Madonna or the guy that had to leave his apartment because she was shaking his walls, shaking his pictures off the wall?
I think Madonna should have won.
And she could.
Probably, yeah.
You know what? She moved to France.
Yeah,
exactly.
She can afford it.
She did, and she moved into a house. So there you go, a villa. Did I say house? I meant villa. Okay. There are 4 basic choices that pervade the law in the United States, and in many other countries, each choice creates a dilemma and has psychological implications. The rights of the individual versus the common good. And of course, this has to do with what's going on right now. This was a question in Charlottesville. They had the right to have that rally. As a matter of fact, they bought a permit to have the rally. It was the counter rally that was the question. Now these people are rallying against the rally, is what was happening in Charlottesville. And the reason that they were rallying against it was because these were some fairly noxious individuals. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists. They were neo-Nazis. What else was it? Somebody, KKKs. A lovely group of individuals. They had the right to meet, but the other group also had the right to counter, to meet as well, to say that they didn't support it. The next weekend, of course, they had 9 rallies all over the United States. White supremacists had 9 rallies around the United States. Did you see the one in Boston? Where they were in a gazebo in the middle of the Boston Commons, and everybody else was ringing around them, and there were tens of thousands of people that came to counter-protest, and there were like a couple hundred people in the gazebo, as confusing as that is. Okay, individual rights and the common good. People are saying hate is not a positive thing, so the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, and the KKK we should not support hate. But do they have a right to rally? Do they have a right to do what they did? To meet? Of course they do. Sure. It's a right in the United States. Common good and individual rights. Equality versus discretion. This has to do with legal aspects. Do judges treat everybody the same, or do they use discretion to deal with select individuals? Right now on PBS, actually it was on last night, there's a television show called Tribal Justice. It's about tribal courts in California. Fascinating stuff. Tribal courts in California. To discover the truth or to resolve the conflict. If we watch television shows about mystery stories, if we watch CSI or NCIS, they're always looking for the truth. But sometimes you're just trying to stop the conflict. So which is actually more important, the truth or stopping the conflict? And of course, this question has come up, especially during the Civil Rights Movement, the peace movement during the 1970s. This was huge. Are we just trying to stop things, or are we actually looking for the truth? If we're dealing with civil rights, obviously, everybody should be treated equally. We should be looking for the truth. Just because someone has darker skin than another individual doesn't make them inferior to that person. But that was the way they were being treated in the South. And that's the way they were being treated in the North. And actually, if you think about it, Black Lives Matter deal with the exact same topic. So are we just trying to, we just want everybody to be peaceful and to leave each other alone, or are we looking for the truth? The truth may be that that person shouldn't be dead, that young black male shouldn't be dead, because he wasn't really posing a threat. And this has happened over and over and over again. They had an individual that was stopped up in Minnesota, up in Minneapolis. And when the guy stopped him, he told the policeman, I have a weapon in the back seat. And as soon as he told him that, the policeman drew his weapon and shot him and killed him. His wife was sitting beside him. His wife was white. He was black. His child was sitting in the back seat. And he was saying, I have a gun on the floor in the back seat. And the man shot him, despite the fact he hadn't done anything. He hadn't done anything. He stopped him for a traffic violation. Okay. Conflict versus truth. Science versus the law as a source of decisions, and we're going to deal with that at the end of the chapter. Smokers are now banned from lighting up in some public parks and beaches and along shorelines and trails. You can't even go outside and smoke. There are select places where you have to go to smoke. Does this make any sense? The one place you can smoke, I guess, are casinos in select states. Some states do not allow you to smoke in casinos. Any place somebody else is, because the reality is that secondhand smoke affects other individuals. Not only that, but it contaminates the entire area. So you get what is called third-hand smoke. So all those toxins from that cigarette, that's the excuse. But the reality is, this person has a right to smoke. It's an individual right. And who can tell them that they can't?
So does that mean that Madonna was in the right?
She had her own individual right. She could play her music as loud as she wanted.
So did she move out, or was it the
She did move out. She moved out because the other people complained. And she didn't care, but eventually it got to her. She left. She didn't just leave the apartment, she left the country. She moved to France and married some French guy or something. I don't know. She's kind of an interesting character. Was she right or was she wrong? She wasn't wrong. But the common good was that she turned her damn radio down, just like the guy downstairs. And he would do it if my wife went downstairs, but he wouldn't do it if I went downstairs. He got pissed off. He was drunk almost all the time. Then he got hit. He broke his leg. I'm laughing because he broke his leg. That's cool, isn't it? He was in a car. He was in a car, and this other guy was on crutches, walking along the street, and he had just come out of the bar, and he saw this guy, and he started chasing him with his car. He didn't know him. He just thought it was funny to see this guy trying to run with his. He was drunk. You know. We thought they were going to send him back home after that, but they didn't. Then he broke his leg, so it was kind of funny. He couldn't chase me anymore. Guy with a broken leg chasing him.
Just like taunting him in front of him,
Yeah.
punches.
No,
1-inch punches.
He was huge. This guy was a monster. With hair. He had all this hair. Should cities be able to limit smoking in public areas? And of course there are, I don't know, is there smoking on the reservation in public areas? So there are no strictures about that. But if you go to Albuquerque or Phoenix, you can't smoke downtown. Okay. Should smokers' rights or non-smokers' rights prevail? Now we know that there are laws against smoking in select places. Government buildings, you cannot smoke in government buildings, even on the reservation. Okay. You can't smoke in government buildings. So are non-smokers' rights more important than smokers' rights? They've determined that it's a health hazard. And because they've determined it's a health hazard, smokers' rights are put on the back burner. The non-smokers' rights are more important because it's a health hazard, as confusing as that is. In 2012, 6 states in the District of Columbia, and those 6 states were New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Iowa, and Connecticut. They allowed same-sex marriages in Washington State and Maryland, had referendums on their ballots to allow same-sex marriage as well. So there's 6 places you could go in the United States and get married if you were gay. 6 places. District of Columbia, you could go to Iowa and get married if you wanted. So Iowa was one of the first states to legalize gay marriage. Laws in many more conservative states define marriage as between a man and a woman. So only men and women could get married. Not only did they not legalize gay marriage, but they also made it against the law to be married and be gay in that state. Right. Okay. Utah was one of those states. So if you were gay and you had gotten married in Iowa or Massachusetts or Vermont, then potentially they could arrest you if you claimed to be married in Utah, because that was their law. What are we talking about? Older people were more against same-sex marriage than young people. Which point of view should prevail, of course, was the question. This was on the ballot. This is not that long ago. That's like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, this was a very controversial thing. 9 years ago, Bush ran on a platform that banned gay marriage. This was only like 9 years ago. And his platform was that gay marriage should never occur. And the Republican Party has been using this as to attract evangelical Christians for an extended length of time, for maybe 15 years. Before that, nobody even thought about it. Nobody was pushing for gay marriage. But now, of course, it's legal all over the United States. And that was only 5 years ago. This has been an issue. So which is right? Which point of view should prevail? Well, if you're an evangelical Christian, if you're a staunch believer that this is incorrect, then of course you think that gay marriage is an abomination or whatever. But that's a question. This has to do with individual rights of the individual and common good, whether it's better for the society. Now the argument, once upon a time, it was against the law to be gay in the military. And this was a huge conflict, a huge controversy in the military. Because there were gay members of the military, but they had to hide. They had to pretend that they weren't gay. And this has been going on for hundreds of years. The reality is there are a lot of gay people that have served in the military honorably and nothing has happened. But the excuse was that if you're gay, then the other side can turn you because they will tell you that they're going to tell your superiors, and then you'll get kicked out of the service with a dishonorable discharge. That was the argument. And I can remember having this conversation with somebody in Vietnam, where they were telling people that if you were gay, then you were going to become a communist spy. And that's the reason you can't be gay in the military. I always found that interesting. I have a friend that was a cop. And he talked about going out on the flight line at night and finding couples in their cars. People park and they do things. Or not. You guys don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
No.
I know, people having sex in cars, really? No, it happens, Okay. Or if I'm telling you something that you've never heard of before, then I apologize.
That's your ears, right.
So he would go out and he would find these people, and sometimes they were gay couples. And he was a policeman, so it was his duty to not only stop them from having sex in the cars, which he never did, he didn't care. but also to turn them in for being gay. And he said he didn't care who people were having sex with, wasn't important to him. So he let them go. This is the most conservative guy in the whole wide world, yet he was allowing people to have sex, and even gay couples to have sex without turning them in. As confusing as that is. Okay, so the question is, which side should prevail? Obviously, the side of gay marriage has prevailed. But it's only been over the last 5 years that it's prevailed. And the reason it's prevailed is because of the Supreme Court. If you disagree with that, then sorry, that's the law of the land now. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. But something else has happened as far as this is concerned. Something has happened recently as far as gay marriage is concerned. Oh, transgenders. Yeah, Trump has decided that transgenders should not be allowed to serve in the military, even though, and how many people are we talking about anyway?
They never say.
Well, it is kind of hard to say, but I think the number is in the hundreds. It's like 200 or 300 people that we're talking about. I know. So he says, well, we're not going to pay for that surgery anymore, but the reality is, of course, I know, it would cost more money, and they worked this thing out. It would cost more money to kick these people out, these highly trained individuals out of the military, than it would to stop them or kick them out of the service because of the surgery. Surgery's not that expensive, as it turns out, whether you believe in this or not important. I know, it's point of law. Some cities have banned what they refer to as sagging pants. This is really important. Looking around the room, only Jeff wears his pants that way. Okay, you don't either. Anyway, this is really controversial, evidently. I don't even think about it. If I see somebody with their pants hanging around their thighs or whatever, hanging off their butt, and I get to see their really interesting looking boxer shorts, I don't care. I don't care. It's just clothes.
Yeah.
So I don't want to see somebody's butt crack, but
Goodness.
do I complain about cleavage? Do I?
Do you?
Never have
No.
before. So why do I care if I can see somebody's butt crack? The guy that comes and fixes my bathroom, I can see his butt crack, and I don't complain about that. Anyway, this is huge. This is massive. I didn't realize how irritating this is to some people. It's on Facebook all the time. People, we need to do away with these sagging pants. Okay, some cases have actually gone to trial for breaking the decency ordinance, and this is all you can do. You can find these individuals, and hopefully they'll pull their pants up. Is it a question of freedom of expression? Clothes. Should we ban Boston Red Sox hats in this class? Because it irritates me so much. Should we ban food in this class? Because it bothers me so much. Freedom of expression. Should I tell everybody nobody can wear black clothes anymore? Because, well, I don't like black clothes, okay? They're not interesting enough. I want color in my outfits. Everybody has to wear a coat and tie. And an uncle that, he was not a construction worker, he's a heavy equipment operator. He'd go to work every day, and after work he would go into the office and change his clothes into a shirt and tie. And at that time they had these stiff collars. So you'd have a shirt, a white shirt, then you'd have to put on this collar that it's stuck up in your neck. And then you'd have to wear a tie. And that's the way he went home every day. Because he didn't want to look like a common worker, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, that's the way everybody looked. In the 1950s and 1940s, if you ever watch a movie from the 1950s and 1940s, in 1930s, everybody wore a hat outside. Everybody wore a hat. You had to wear a hat. And it had to be a nice hat, felt hat, expensive hat. Everybody had to have a hat on. As confusing as that is, that was just the style. Women wore clothes. If they went outside and it was anything important, like going to church, you had to wear gloves. Women had to wear gloves, as confusing as that is. Okay, so clothes. Is this indecent? Evidently this is really important because it's on Facebook. all the time. Of course, most of the people that I know on Facebook are like 100 years old. I'm kidding. They're all in their 60s, okay? And they're all just so upset about this. Sagging pants. I don't want to see your underwear.
They should look down.
When I was in high school, I wanted to see people's underwear. I know. Well, does a community have the right to set their code of decency more conservatively than society in general? Select neighborhoods, this is the way people dress. So you can see their boxer shorts. I don't know.
Represent?
This is really kind of an interesting question. Are we going to tell people that they have to wear their clothes in a certain way? You have to wear certain clothes. I don't know. No pink shirts, if that's pink. Party animal?
Yeah, it's from,
That's animal.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Cool shirt, Jeff.
Oh, thanks.
Don't ever wear it again. Okay, these guys are really kind of interesting. People have mobilized all around the country to fight these guys, as horrible as this is. 2006, a Baptist church in Topeka, Kansas. One church, the Westboro Baptist Church, began protesting the U.S. liberal policy of allowing homosexuality to go unpunished by protesting at soldiers' funerals that the soldiers died as punishment for U.S. gay policies. So they would go to funerals and they would hold these horrible signs. This man had just died. All of his friends and relatives are there to see him into his grave. And they would hold signs that said that he was condemned to hell because the United States doesn't have a policy that punishes gay people. As horrible as this sounds. So the biker community has gotten together trying to block these individuals. And anytime they appear, the motorcycle riders will park right in front of them. And when they move, the bikers move. As positive as that is. Anyway, so do they have the right to do this? Can this church do this? Well, it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided that they had a free speech won over anything else, invasion of privacy. And they were sued, which could have been interesting, because what happens if you sue a church? Can you get any money out of it? Well, we can see all the millions and millions of dollars that are coming out of the Catholic Church because of the molestation, but would they have gotten any money out of the Westboro Baptist Church? Probably not. But they weren't looking for money, they were just they were grieving. Here they are grieving, and these guys are telling them that their son's going to go to hell, or whatever. Yeah, well, the son's going to go to hell. God hates fags, God hates fag enablers, God hates your tears. Thank God for IEDs. Thank God for IEDs, that's really kind of cool. God hates the USA and all of this stuff. God's view of Uncle Sam. Okay, wow. Interesting people. They won. They won, so they can do whatever they want to do, sadly enough. The U.S. is one of the most individualistic countries on earth. The most individualistic country, if you ever want to go someplace where they actually are more individualistic than in the United States, go to France. Go to Paris. Wow, Paris is amazing. If you want to see naked people, go to Paris. Okay, there you go. If you want to see naked people, go to Amsterdam. My goodness, they're in the windows. It's really kind of, the red light district in Amsterdam is really kind of fascinating.
Field trip.
I think they're closing that down. Actually, prostitution around Europe is legal. It's legal. I used to live in Ramstein, Germany. I used to work in Ramstein, Germany. And right off the base was this 3-story building with a great big lips down here and a big heart right there. It was a brothel. It was for guys to go and visit prostitutes. Fascinating. You wouldn't see that in the United States. A house with lips on it or something. People could deviate from the norm. Freedom and personal autonomy are two of our most deeply desired values. Personal autonomy and freedom. And we talk about this all the time. This is part of every candidate's speech, is talking about personal autonomy and freedom. We want freedom in the United States, and I support that. Trump said it, Hillary said it, Clinton has, she's a Clinton. The Bushes said it, all of the candidates over the last 200 years have talked about personal autonomy and freedom. People need to feel secure. Society has a vested interest in discouraging risks that might injure the individual or others, as it creates a burden on society. So society wants to keep you safe. So they do things like they pass laws. They won't let the uranium mines just dump their... Well, actually, they try to control it a little bit. The coal mines are the same way. The coal mines have just as much toxins. On the Fort Belknap reservation, they had a gold mine that was off the reservation, but unfortunately the cyanide from the cyanide leaching procedure leaked onto the reservation. So who has the rights? The gold mine, the mine owners, or the people of Fort Belknap? They're poisoning them with the cyanide. That's rat poison, if you know anything about rats. It's rat poison, and here they are, it's leaching into the water supply, especially at the southern end of Fort Belknap Reservation, up in the mountains, up in the Little Rockies. So who has the rights?
The company, because of the kind of land it's on,
It's on their land.
on the federal land.
Oh, and it's not federal land, it's an autonomous group of
Autonomous
individuals. So who has the rights? So do you sue the mining company? Sure you do. And then they lose, and guess what happens next? They fold, and another group goes in. Do they have responsibility for what the other group of people did?
No.
Sometimes it's the same company.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just declare bankruptcy and fold.
Yeah.
And never clean it up. So individual rights versus personal freedom. Individual rights plus the common good, that's the question. That's what was in question up in Standing Rock. That's what the whole mess was about. It was individual rights versus the common good. And who won in that case? We're still not exactly sure who won. Consider U.S. Supreme Court decisions since the 1960s with respect to the rights of criminal suspects and defendants versus the rights of crime victims and the power of the police. Since the 1960s, the Supreme Court established a number of principles that provided or expanded explicit rights for those suspected of breaking the law. Now if you're arrested, and I hope none of you have ever heard this, but they have to give you your Miranda rights. They have to tell you that you have the right to remain silent. That whatever you say can't be used in a court of law. So shut up. You also have the right to an attorney. And that attorney will tell you what to say. Or what not to say. Anyway, these are your Miranda rights. And the reason that they refer to Miranda is because he's the one that brought it before the Supreme Court. Before that, they could just get you into a room and harass you and harass you and harass you until eventually, and they wouldn't tell you that you had the right to remain silent. So being the people that we are, sometimes we respond to their questions, of course, and people would implicate themselves. So in the 1960s, a guy by the name of Miranda, who could barely speak English, interestingly, of course, he's from Mexico, and he is a naturalized citizen of the United States. He didn't know what the hell was going on. And they got him in the interrogation room, and he implicated himself, answering questions yes and no, and eventually, of course, they were able to use that as a confession, even though he was innocent. And he didn't really understand what the questions he was answering. Sometimes he didn't understand what they were asking him. And he would say, see? And of course, half the time he was unaware of what was going on. So he took it to the Supreme Court, and eventually they decided, man, you gotta warn these guys, okay? If they can't speak English, you need to get an interpreter. Which is always interesting. Many of these rights were trimmed later when courts ruled in favor of the police. And since then, Miranda rights came in the 1960s. What was going on in the 1960s? Lots of crap. was going on in the 1960s. We had civil rights going on, and then eventually, of course, nobody cared about the black people in the United States. They were willing to just hose them down with fire hoses and release the dogs, and shoot them with rubber bullets, or do whatever they wanted. Nobody cared. It was the white people in the crowd. That's the reason why, when I was jacked up, they were really scared. They knew that the black guys in the car weren't going to do anything, but they had no clue who I was. So it was the white people. Remember, it's a white-dominated society. So what's going on? Okay, so that was the civil rights movement. One of the reasons that the war in Vietnam, what are you going to do with all these white kids that are protesting? You can't hose them down with water. You can't release the dogs on them. You can't just shoot them because people care. Other white people care. So of course that's one of the reasons why the peace movement and actually the peace movement made less sense than civil rights did. That everybody's equal. Yeah, it says that in the Constitution, but it took them decades to get their point across. For them to stop Jim Crow laws in the South, as confusing as that may be, that it's because nobody cared about it. But they do care about white kids, and that's one of the reasons why the peace movement was so successful in the United States, and it took such a short period of time. They didn't want to shoot the white kids. You shoot white kids, and all of a sudden you've got the people that are important complaining about what's going on. Okay, so that's what was going on in the 1960s. This guy's name was Miranda. He was Hispanic. Does anybody care about Hispanics? No. In the United States, nobody cared if they were Hispanic. They were doing things like what's that little Chihuahua dog for Taco Bell? Poco Taco? What was that? I don't remember. Anyway, they had Speedy Gonzalez. I mean, they were really insulting things to Hispanics. They had the Frito Bandito was an advertisement, as if all Mexicans are. He had bullets strapped across his chest. He'd draw his gun and talk about Fritos. Of course, Fritos is Lay's potato chips. Lay's potato chips are out of Texas. So yeah, of course you're going to get all kinds of crap out of anti-Hispanic things. Okay, so that was what was going on in the 1960s. So yeah, we're trying to stop the police from jacking everybody up, because sometimes they run into white kids and they think that they're not white. I don't know. I'm the whitest guy in the world, and here they jack me up anyway. Okay, so that was in the 1960s, but since the 2000s, everybody that runs for president, everybody that runs for Congress, they have to talk about how serious they are about crime, because they want to protect all the white people, of course. Of course they want to protect the white people. Okay, so they've changed, the laws have gone backwards. Once upon a time we had the Miranda laws, we were headed in that direction toward equality, toward treating the criminal like a human being. Then all of a sudden 9/11 occurred, and we can't tell the difference between a terrorist and somebody that's not a terrorist. So all of a sudden all those laws went out the window. And now all those laws have changed to some extent. If they think you're a terrorist, they can stop you. This is one of the reasons why they're shooting black kids on the street. Not that they're terrorists, but they are profiling them. So profiling is lawful now. You can profile people just because they look Middle Eastern. You can stop them. You can check out their car. It would be like the Navajo police stopping somebody because they think they're a bootlegger. Bootlegging, of course, is against the law. So if you see somebody in a Chevy, I don't know, all Chevys carry alcohol. I don't know. What kind of car do you have, Brian?
What was it called?
It's a Honda?
No. It's a Chevy.
It's a Chevy? Okay.
It's a car.
I'm not really thinking about it. Okay. Chevy, okay. Many of these rights were trimmed later when the courts ruled in favor of the police. The Supreme Court ruled that the police can stop a motorist whom they believe has violated traffic laws, even if their ulterior motive, the motive in the front of their mind, is to investigate the possibility of illegal drug dealing. Okay, so what do drug dealers look like? Well, remember they stopped that kid right outside of Gallup. He was a black kid, and he was in the car with two white girls, if I remember correctly. So they stopped him, remember? Okay, and he did have marijuana in the car, lots of marijuana in the car. Then he tried to drive away with the policeman in the car, and the girls were punching the cop, and eventually they got him stopped. I don't remember what happened about that. I can't remember what happened about that. Anyway, but the reason they stopped him was for a traffic violation. Yeah. And then they looked for drugs in his car. If I get stopped, I've never been jacked up for drugs. Not in my little car. Not because my hair's white. I don't know. Maybe I don't look like a drug dealer. Anyway, I've never been checked for drugs. But they can stop you for one reason, and they can inspect your car if you will allow them to. As a matter of fact, I think that's what happened. Didn't they say they were going to call in the drug dogs? Does anybody remember this? Yeah, they're going to call in the drug dogs, and that's when the guy got back in his car and took off. And then they were chasing him, the cop was sitting in the passenger seat in the front. The two ladies were in the back, and they were punching the cop. There are two models of criminal justice, the criminal justice system. The conflict between the rights of individuals and the rights of society is related to a distinction between the due process model and the crime control model within the criminal justice system. So due process means that you have to always do the same thing, and you have to be fair to everybody. The crime control model is different. The crime control model allows you to stop somebody who looks like a criminal. Now, what does a criminal look like? A criminal has tattoos. A criminal has if he's a male, he has long hair. If he's African American or Hispanic. Didn't Donald Trump declare law on a select gang, 13 something or other? I can't remember. Anyway, he's declared law, a war against these guys. He declared war against a select gang of Hispanics who are coming up from Central America, causing all these problems in the United States. How can you tell these people if you just see them on the street?
You can't. Colors.
Well, first of all, they're Hispanic. And second of all, they've got lots and lots of tattoos. There you go. So you arrest everybody with lots of tattoos who's Hispanic and they have short haircuts, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Does anybody else wear tattoos?
Yes.
Really? Do any other Hispanics wear tattoos other than people from this gang? Does anybody else cut their hair short? No.
And has long hair and what are you talking about?
And that's the crime control model. Okay. So we have two different ways of looking at the world. Due process model was favored in the 1960s, of course. This is when we were liberalizing all of our laws around the United States. If you were African American, you were arrested in the South, then potentially they're going to throw not only the book at you, but they were going to lock you up and throw away the key. You could steal a candy bar and end up with life imprisonment in the South because if you were a young black male, especially if you were a young black male. If you were a young black female, probably less was going to happen to you. But if you were a young black male, they'd throw you in jail. I worked in Mississippi in 1990. When was I in Mississippi? From 1995 to 1998. I was teaching at Mississippi University for Women. I was also teaching for the East Mississippi Community College. Anyways, teaching, I had two jobs. I was adjunct at both places. Anyway, I had a black student, black female student, and she was complaining that she couldn't find a boyfriend. And I said, being the idiot that I am, I said, well, why don't you just date white guys? There's a lot of nice white guys out there. And she said, no. The problem was that there were no young black males because they were either dead, had already been killed, or they were in jail, or they were on parole. And she said, you can't find anybody. All the guys that she graduated from high school with, huge class of 300 people, 175 of them are female and 125 are male. There were like 5 of them. Or they're married, that was the other one. They were either married, dead, in jail, or on parole. So, and that was in the South. And this is in 1995. So she couldn't find anybody to date. She didn't like white guys, I won't tell you why, but she didn't like white. So this is in the 1960s. They needed to liberalize these laws, especially in the South, not so much in the North. One of the reasons that they didn't have the same problem in the North is because they have a smaller population of African Americans in the North. That's one reason. But why in the world would the African Americans go from the really nice warm South to the North? Why would they go north? Because of the repressive laws of the South. So they went north to find work. But of course, they didn't all go up north, and they had relatively small percentages of African Americans in those states. The state with the least African Americans, does anybody know what it is?
Utah.
No. Actually, Salt Lake City has a fairly significant African American population.
Montana.
Which state has the fewest African Americans?
Montana.
No.
Pennsylvania?
No, they're like 3% or something.
Idaho. Ohio.
Hawaii.
It's Vermont and New Hampshire. Why Vermont and New Hampshire? Well, it's cold up there, for one thing. Who wants to go up? Actually, there's a large African-American population in Buffalo where it's colder, but there's no manufacturing in those states. The reason African-Americans came north from the South, of course, there weren't any in the North before because of slavery, and there was no slavery in the North. The reason that they came north was for jobs, and if there were no manufacturing jobs, there was nothing for them to do. So they moved to places with manufacturing jobs: Buffalo, New York; Rochester, New York; Chicago; Indianapolis. Places where they had manufacturing jobs, and that's the reason they came north. Okay. New prospect. Okay. So in the 1960s, they liberalized all of these things. They liberalized all the laws. So you'll see a change of the way we deal with things from the 1960s until the terrorist attacks of 2001. The new process model places the primary values on the protection of citizens, including criminal suspects, from possible abuses by the police and the law enforcement system generally, and so that's the due process model. Due process model told the police they needed to be nicer people, and actually it worked. The due process model assumes the innocence of the suspects and requires that they be treated fairly by the criminal justice system. In the South in the 1960s and 1970s, sometimes they just executed. Sometimes they just killed you. The three famous freedom riders that were killed in Mississippi, it was just south of where I lived in Mississippi, they were killed by a deputy sheriff. This was one of the individuals. It was the Ku Klux Klan. But he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and the deputy sheriff was right there when they were shot and buried in a earthen dam. And it was in Noxubee County, which is just south of Lowndes County. And I lived in Lowndes County, and Noxubee County is the next one down. As horrible as that sounds. Thus, the due process model emphasizes the rights of the individuals over the temptation by society to assume suspects are guilty even before the trial. And of course, the vigilantes, you've seen it on television, the old cowboy movies where they go into the jail, and of course, there's dozens and dozens of people with guns, and they tell the policeman, don't do anything, Charlie, or we'll hurt you. And then they go into the jail and they take the guy out and lynch him. Lynch mobs. And there were lynchings all over the United States. It was one of the great embarrassments of the United States. All these lynchings of African Americans because they did something against society. What was the something they did against society? Well, they may have had a white girlfriend. But maybe they just said, I think you're pretty. Or they said, good morning. They looked somebody in the eye. And they weren't supposed to do this, as horrible as that sounds. Anyway, lynchings in the United States. Before the 1960s, there were lynchings every year, usually of African American males. Sometimes of African American females. Crime control model was favored in the 1990s. The crime control model seeks the apprehension and punishment of lawbreakers. So if you were part of the political scene in the 1990s, there was a flip. They decided that we were too soft on crime. There was a presidential election in 1988 between Dukakis and the first George Bush. And George Bush kept saying that Dukakis was soft on crime. He was soft on crime. He was soft on crime. Who were the people that he was showing in his video? George Bush. He was showing African American males, especially African American males. Not just African American males who looked just like any other male, but they were scary looking African American males with beards and mean looks on their faces, trying to scare the white people into voting for George Bush. And it worked. They voted for him. And he won the election because of these scare tactics. So throughout the 1990s, everything was flipping in the other direction. They had become more liberalized, and all of a sudden, the anti-criminal movement started in the United States. And then all of a sudden, if you wanted to be elected to office, you had to be tough on crime. So all of the congressmen, all of the mayors, all of the governors of every state, they had to be tough on crime. They had to incarcerate people that were endangering the people of their state. The goal is to ensure that criminal activity is being contained or reduced. The 3 strikes life term started in California. So if you broke the law 3 times, you were convicted 3 times. The 3rd time, you're put in jail forever, for life, with no chance of parole.
You know, in the 90s too, they also developed programs like the DARE programs for minority schools. And that's what their idea of crime reduction was.
Right, crime reduction.
Was to criminalize youth that weren't
Right.
even criminal yet.
I think the DARE program was for everybody. We did it overseas when I was in Japan. So I was one of the guys that administered it to all the little kids, all the little 3rd graders, scared the shit out of them. I'll tell you. Stay away from drugs.
And you know, today too, it's actually the anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech from
Oh, really?
1963 MLK speech.
47, 50, 64 years ago. Okay, I can do that. It takes a while, but I can do it. So the 3 strikes started, and you can understand why he made that speech. Okay, this is in 1963. This is a bold thing to say in 1963, especially for a black man. And if he had been a black politician rather than a black religious leader, it wouldn't have had the same impact. But of course, this is one of the reasons why he was assassinated. But it's also one of the reasons why there is a street in practically every major city in the United States named after Martin Luther King Jr. While everybody else was trying to tear us apart, he was trying to pull us all together. And this is in the 60s. It's a bold, bold movement. 1 of every 32 Americans is either incarcerated or on parole or on probation. 1 out of every 32 Americans. Any guesses as to how this breaks down as far as minorities are concerned? Is it 1 out of every 32 white people? It's more like 1 out of every 60-something. But African Americans, it's much, much higher than that. I told you that young lady couldn't find anybody to date because everybody was either dead, they were incarcerated, or they were on parole. I had another student that was talking about the fact that she only dated men who had been to Parkman. Parkman was the penitentiary in the state of Mississippi. She only dated men that had been there and had come out. I don't want to go into the rest of it. It had to do with being a sadist. But, we don't want to go into the rest of it. The principle of equality means that all people who commit the same crime should receive the same consequences. So if I have 100 pounds of marijuana in my trunk, which is impossible because my trunk is this, like this big, it's not very big. I don't think I could fit 100 pounds in my car. Anyway, and you guys had 100 pounds in your car, would they prosecute us exactly the same? Would I get the same sentence that you got? No, hell no. For one thing, I'm old, and they'd say, oh, he's only going to live for a couple more weeks. If we throw him in jail for 3 weeks, well, he's not going to make it. And you guys, oh, you're young, strapping individuals, so we'll throw them in jail for a really long time. The blind adherence to the equality can lead to unfairness in situations in which the particular characteristics of the offender, victim, or offense matter. Thus, discretion can be needed in criminal cases. And we're going to talk about this. This is huge. So should we look at your circumstance? Do we have to look at your circumstance? Should we care if you've got children at home and you're the only one that can take care of them? If we arrest you and throw you in jail, we're going to have to foster your children. So not only are we incarcerating you, but now we're going to have to pay somebody to take care of your babies. You know, this is huge. This is really massive. So if it's somebody that doesn't have a family, isn't it more likely that we're going to throw them in jail for an extended length of time? So yeah, of course, we're going to use discretion as far as that's concerned. All people should be treated equally, and no one should receive special treatment by the courts simply because he or she is rich, influential, etc. Why in the world did O.J. get off when for murdering Nicole Simpson? I can't remember her first name. Why did he get off? Did he get off because he was famous?
Because of racial tensions?
I'm sorry?
Because of racial tension?
Yeah, that could be another reason why he got off. You know, he's just another black guy, so why in the world did they just throw the book at him? I mean,
Wasn't it because of the glove?
yeah, if the glove doesn't fit, you have to acquit. Yeah. Did he actually do it? Well, I don't know. They just let him out of jail, but he was never convicted for that. Actually, he lost in a civil trial. So any money that he made from that point forward had to go to the Simpson family, not the Simpson family, his ex-wife's family and the Ronald Goldman family. So he had to sell his Heisman Trophy and all kinds of interesting things. But he was famous, so he was acquitted. I don't know if that had something to do with this acquittal. Maybe he didn't do it, and they were right. It's possible. But rich people seem to get away with stuff, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got money to hire a good lawyer, you're in good shape. However, there have been incidents that suggest unequal treatment of citizens by the legal system, and of course profiling is one of those things. How many young white people young white males do they blow away in the streets? Do we ever hear about that? Of course, Black Lives Matter. We hear about all the African Americans that are shot, but what about all those poor white kids that are getting blown away out there? I'm making that up. There aren't many white kids being blown away out there. Because of profiling. If you watch Cops, I don't know if you've ever seen that television show, they're always arresting people. And what race are those people? Are there a lot of white people that they deal with? They're almost all Hispanic or black. Okay, so if I'm a policeman and I watch those television shows, who do I know is the bad guy? It's all the black kids and it's all the Hispanic kids. Not just Hispanic kids, they have to have a shaved head. Don't they all have shaved heads? I don't know. I don't watch Cops, so I'm not exactly sure. Every time I watch it, it pisses me off. And then I have a friend who's a policeman, and I'll email him about something. We'll be talking about how it's unfair, and he says, "Oh, don't you watch Cops?" And I say, "I don't watch Cops." Don't you know who's the bad guy out there? Yes, I know who the bad guy is.
Well, maybe you need to look for the tattoos.
We should look for the tattoos. We should count the number of tattoos. Well, actually, this happened to me the other day. I told you about going to Cracker Barrel, and there was a guy sitting in front of me who had prison tattoos all over one arm, and he had a shaved haircut. So I watched that guy. I wanted to make sure everything was okay. He looked like he was a dangerous fellow. Everybody else in the restaurant was either as old as I am or they were big. They were obese. So, but this guy was fairly fit, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing there eating by himself. But I watched him because he had the prison tattoos on just on one arm. The other arm was clean, but he had prison tattoos, he had neck tattoos, and he had one that crawled up under his ear. Because he had a tattoo up here. So I thought, well, this looks like a dangerous guy. And maybe it's prejudice on my part. Yeah, it probably is. People have all kinds of tattoos on their arms all the time. That's not so bad. It's the culture, yeah. Not, well, yeah. I mean, looked like a sleeve. It really did look like a sleeve. It was kind of interesting. Anyway, I profiled the guy. And so I watched him. Everything was fine. And not only that, but when he left, some people, they just trash the place. And they make people clean up after him. This guy, he not only stacked all of his dishes, but he swept off the table. I thought that was cool. I do the same thing. Of course, I've never been to prison, so. I was at a powwow up north one time, and in between, during the break, we were mopping off the powwow floor. It was in the gymnasium. And I was doing this with a friend of mine, and of course, I'm not a very good mopper. I'm a pretty bad mopper. So I'm mopping along, and he's going like 3 times as fast as I am. And he says, "Haven't you ever been in prison? This is the way you do it." Anyway, no, I've never been to prison. I'm a horrible mopper. I apologize. But we got the floor done, even though we did 3 times as much as I did. Between 2004 and 2009, police officers in New York City stopped approximately 3 million people. Of these 3 million people, 52% of the people stopped were African American, 30% were Hispanic. So I told you, if you're African American or if you're Hispanic with a short haircut and tattoos, by golly, you're going to get stopped. So what does that mean? That means that only 18% of the people they stopped were white. They were profiling, and this is what profiling is. Most of them, of course, were young and poor. You can't tell if somebody's poor just by stopping them, but if they're not driving a car, I guess even if they are driving a car, it's called driving while black, or in this case, driving while brown. In New York City, of course, you're going to get stopped. And they bragged about it because crime went down a select percent. Of course, crime went down the same percent all over the United States without the profiling. Because we were in a strong economic period, and economics has a lot to do with how much crime is being committed. Crime is going down in the United States. You can thank Donald Trump for that. No, it doesn't have anything to do with Donald Trump. During the Obama administration, it steadily went down, and it's continuing on the same trend. Why? It's the economy. It has to do with the economy. The worse the economy is, the more crime you have. It doesn't have anything to do, well, it does have to do with the president's policies, but if Trump starts bragging about it, which he probably will, it doesn't have anything to do with, well, it has to do with the fact that the economy is so strong, just like it was under the Obama administration. Relevant to the issue of equality under the law, the U.S. Supreme Court has occasionally applied principle of proportionality. The punishment should be consistently related to the magnitude of the offense. Murder, of course, we put you in jail for a select amount of time, or maybe forever, if you murder somebody. If you steal, if it's a felony, felonies are over $500. If you steal a car, then the black guy should get the same sentence as the white guy that steals a car. And this is known as proportionality. So one thing we could do, we could take away the judge's ability to incarcerate somebody for a select amount of time. We can say, well, he stole $1,500 worth of stuff, so he has to go to jail for 1 to 3 years, no matter whether he's black, white, native, or Asian.
Is
He
that
has to go to
applicable to
jail.
like first-time offenders?
Yes, we'll count the number of times they've been arrested. Yeah, this is really important. Since psychosocial immaturity renders juveniles less culpable and more likely to be rehabilitated than adult offenders, the U.S. Supreme Court has overturned harsh sentences for juvenile offenders in the quest for equality. And this happened in Indiana. There was a young man who was underage who murdered, he wanted to rape the woman. So he murdered the 2 children, and he raped the woman and murdered her. And he was only 15. So in Indiana, they decided to try him as an adult. And since they tried him as an adult, they put him in jail forever. And then the Supreme Court came in and said, you can't do that. He's a juvenile, so you can't do that. Okay. I had a cousin, I hate to tell you about my bad relatives. I had a cousin, and this kid decided he was going to drop out of school, and he's going to hitchhike across the country. This one guy picked him, he and his partner were going to hitchhike across the country. He was only 16 years old. No, he's only 15. No, he's only 16. He was 16 at this point. Okay, so he's hitchhiking across Illinois. This traveling salesman picked him up, and they decided that they wanted the car because then they were afraid this guy was going to rape them. They're two teenage boys. Anyway, so the guy gets out of the car, and the other kid jumps in the driver's seat and ran him over. Or just knocked him down. And they went over. They ran over him, but they didn't run over him with the tires. He was underneath. They scraped him all up. Of course, they knocked him out. And then the kid decided, oh, he's not dead. We better run over him. So they ran back and forth over him with the wheels. And killed the guy, picked up his body, threw him in the trunk. And they drove around for a couple, 3 or 4 days. All of a sudden, it started smelling bad. So they decided to abandon the car. So what did they do? They went back to Indiana. They're both boys from Indiana. They went back to Indiana, and they drove the car into the reservoir. Okay. I don't know if you've ever been in a reservoir, lots of dirt. How far did the car go in? Well, it didn't submerge. Yeah, that was the problem. It didn't submerge. So when they kept trying to push it, and of course it's stuck in the mud, and they can't go in. This is how smart these kids are. This is my cousin. Okay, so he's only 16 years old. So he runs away to Ohio, to his dad's house in Ohio. And there is no, the state of Ohio will not, what's the word I'm looking for? Extradite juveniles to Indiana. They won't extradite them anywhere. So he's safe. As long as he stays in Ohio, he's okay. Guess what happened next? Of course, he had to go home. Yeah, he had to come back to Indiana. And as soon as he came into the county, they arrested him for murder. And the other guy, finding out that he had been arrested, he turned state's evidence. The other guy's the one that ran over the kid. He turned state's evidence, so he gets charged with murder. And the other kid gets off with, I don't know, probation or something. Anyway, so he gets thrown in jail for life. I mean, this is how stupid this kid is. How dumb he is. Why in the world did he come back to the state of Indiana when he was safe in the state of Ohio? He could have just stayed in Ohio and everything would have been fine. No. Guess who he wanted to visit? His mom? Oh, hell no. It wasn't his mom he wanted to visit. Yes, his friend. She was lovely. He needed to come back and visit his girlfriend. How stupid is that? Anyway, what are we talking about? Oh, proportionality, yeah. But when he came back, he was 18, and they tried him as an adult. He was an adult now. Yeah, if he had come back when he was 16, he would have been a juvenile. Okay, yeah, it's a dumb kid. He can't count, and he's too horny to stay home. Those who commit murder before 18 cannot be given the death row penalty. This was decided in 2005 in Roper versus Simmons, nor automatically sentenced to life without parole. That was determined in Miller versus Alabama. And this is Miller here, and this is the guy that he murdered. He claimed he was trying to molest him. This was in 2012. This is Evan Miller. He's only 14 years old when he murdered the guy, and they tried to imprison him for life. And then the Supreme Court later overturned it. As you can see, he's just a baby, barely shaving. In this picture, he's only 16 years old. Anyway, at 14, they tried to imprison him for life. And it is time to leave, and I'll stop right here. I'll pick this up next time. We'll talk about the Indigo Girls. So you guys need to look up to figure out who the hell the Indigo Girls are before next time. As fun as that is. I don't know. I don't like their music.